At first light on December 18, 1944, the platoon radio went dead, the road to Saint-Vith vanished under new enemy tracks, and frost turned breath into smoke that gave away every position. 1 minute they were a screening force along a hedgerow. The next, the map had no safe arrow. The Bulge was not a shape on paper. It was pressure from all directions. Lieutenant Harris laid the battalion overlay across the hood of a stalled truck. The colored grease pencil routes that made sense in the briefing now ran through burning farmsteads and stalled columns. A barn to the south had a white sheet in the doorway. It was not surrender, only laundry frozen mid-wave. He ordered silence, bayonets sheathed, safeties checked twice. The enemy was closing from the east with armor and half-tracks, and from the north with infantry moving tree to tree. The weather selected the survivors. Snow dragged at boots and filled weapon actions. Gloves stiffened. Men kept their fingers on cold metal until they hurt enough to feel alive again. The platoon sergeant counted ammunition in a whisper, then split magazines into 3 piles: suppress, break contact, break out. There would be no resupply. They shifted to the reverse slope. Visibility was 40 meters. Harris used a lensatic compass and the last known grid from the morning net. He drew a narrow corridor that threaded between 2 villages. It was not a road. It was a series of fence lines, drainage ditches, and a narrow orchard that, on the map, looked like a smudge. An enemy probe came in first. 3 figures, cautious, kneeling, rising, advancing by bounds. Private Morales let them pass the culvert, then snapped 2 shots that pinned them. The platoon did not finish the fight. They moved, leaving confusion behind them. Feints were worth more than heroics. They reached the orchard as dusk thickened. Artillery began to range in with short, ugly bursts. The platoon dropped prone and listened to the pattern: 2 long, 1 short, then lift. A forward observer was walking the line by ear. Harris waited through the next cycle, then signaled. The entire line crawled to the ditch that paralleled the road and used the concave earth as a shield while splinters cut the hedge above like shears. At the crossroads, a Mark IV sat hulled down behind a low wall. Its turret was angled toward the west. The crew believed the threat was there. Harris sent 2 men to the right to rattle canteens in a sack and throw a single smoke grenade into an open field. The tank slewed. The platoon crossed the road low, fast, silent, boots soft in churned snow. They found civilians in a cellar that smelled of coal and apples. A woman pointed to a footpath with a trembling hand. It climbed through fir trees toward a saddle Harris had circled on his overlay. He nodded, handed over a field dressing and 2 chocolate bars, and moved on. The war did not pause. Near midnight the radio sputtered to life with fragments: Saint-Vith holding, roads jammed, link up if able. If able, carried the weight of a verdict. The platoon formed a file, spacing strict, each man watching the back of the next man's neck for the small tilt that meant stop. They descended toward a stream cut like a wound in the white ground. Ice cracked under the first 2 men. The rest crossed on fallen rails from a fence. A flare hissed up to the south, then another. The platoon froze, faces to the snow. The light washed over them and found only shapeless mounds. When it died, they moved again, faster now, lungs burning and legs numb. Dawn came as a gray smear. Ahead, a friendly recognition panel hung from a hedgerow, half buried in drift. A forward outpost challenged them, rifles steady. It took a full minute to convince anyone that the 32 men stumbling in were the same unit that had gone out the day before. They were missing 5. They had brought back their map, their story, and a route no one had thought possible. In the afternoon, Harris wrote his after-action report in block letters with a pencil that broke twice. He listed distances by paces, enemy by silhouettes, and success by the simple arithmetic of who had returned. There was no romance in it. There was only the lesson: in the Bulge, the shortest way home is the line you cut yourself through snow, fear, and the moving ring that wants to close. The morning began with a sound that none of them would ever forget. It was not the roar of engines or the distant crash of artillery. It was the metallic grinding of treads on frozen earth, echoing through the fog that hung low over the Ardennes forest. The men of 2nd Platoon knew what it meant before they saw anything. The First SS Panzer Division was on the move. Sergeant Miller raised his field glasses. Between the dark lines of the trees, shapes emerged, armor, infantry, and the unmistakable rhythm of a column advancing with confidence. They were surrounded, and they knew it. The radio operator had been trying to reach battalion for hours, but static and enemy jamming turned every call into a dead whisper. Their supply line had been cut during the night. Ammunition was low. The temperature was dropping fast. The platoon had dug in on the edge of a small Belgian farmstead, just north of Saint-Vith. Broken wagons, frozen cattle, and the blackened ruins of a barn surrounded them. The men waited in silence, breath forming small clouds that drifted into the cold morning air. Every man checked his weapon again and again, not because he needed to, but because the motion helped keep his hands from shaking. Then the first shells landed. They did not explode close, but close enough to shower the trenches with dirt and splinters of ice. The Germans were probing, walking the artillery line closer with each shot. Miller shouted for the machine gun team to shift their position. Private Harris, barely 19, dragged the heavy tripod through the mud, cursing under his breath. The sky was gray and still, but the ground trembled with the approach of tanks. Through the fog came the growl of engines, panthers, maybe tigers, no one could tell for sure. The platoon's bazooka team had one rocket left. They watched the tree lean, waiting for movement. A sudden burst of automatic fire cut across the field, bullets tearing through the wooden fence posts. One man went down, another screamed for a medic. The platoon was being squeezed from two sides now, the enemy using smoke to mask their advance. Miller made a decision. If they stayed, they would die in that frozen ditch. He ordered a fighting withdrawal toward the stream behind the farm. They moved in small groups, leapfrogging through cover, firing, then falling back. The snow was streaked with mud and blood. Each step felt heavier than the last. German voices shouted commands nearby. The ring was closing fast. As they crossed the shallow stream, the last of their ammunition ran dry. The bazooka team waited until the nearest tank broke through the fog, its turret swinging toward them. They fired the final rocket. The explosion rocked the forest and threw smoke and debris into the air. The tank stopped, burning, but another immediately rolled forward to take its place. By dusk, only a handful of men reached the ridgeline beyond the stream. They looked back and saw the farm engulfed in flames, German armor crawling through the wreckage like steel beasts. The radio finally caught a fragment of a friendly signal: fall back to Bastogne, regroup, hold position if possible. Miller stared into the night, exhausted and half-frozen. There was no warmth, no food, and no promise of rescue. Still, they moved. One step at a time, deeper into the forest. Behind them, the ring had closed completely. Ahead, only darkness and the faint hope that someone, somewhere, was still fighting. The road is a white blade under a gray sky. The forest is pinned down by ice. Every step bites and echoes. The platoon studies the map on a hood that shakes in the wind. Saint-Vith lies behind them. Bastogne lies somewhere ahead. Between those names are ridgelines, culverts, and fields cut by hedges that stand like black wire against the snow. The First SS Panzer Division has closed the roads with armor and half-tracks. The enemy owns the crossroads. The platoon must own the ground that the map does not show, the folds, the shadows, the dead ground. They move at dusk, because ice hides under dusk. The sergeant walks the verge and tests the crust with a bayonet. A ditch runs parallel to the road, deep enough to swallow a man, slick enough to break him. Beyond it rises a hedgerow, thick with frozen thorns. Past the hedge the ground shelves down toward a creek bed. That creek is the key. The road draws fire. The creek draws silence. They slide into the creek bottom and crouch under the bank. The lieutenant counts distances. 150 meters to the barn. 200 to the orchard wall. 270 to the machine gun flash that marked the last patrol. He divides the platoon. A base of fire will fix the enemy at the bend. A flanking team will move along the creek to the blind side of the barn. The reserve will pull the wounded and keep the compass honest. The first burst rips the dark. The MG-42 hammers the road, not the creek. Sparks climb from frozen ruts. The base of fire answers with short, measured shots. No waste. No panic. The enemy looks where the noise is. The flanking team crawls where the noise is not. Ice breaks under elbows. The smell is oil and earth and cold metal. They reach the culvert that takes the creek under the road. It is shoulder high and round with frost. The team shuffles through, packs scraping, breath harsh against stone. On the far side, the terrain opens into a shallow bowl. A haystack sits in the center, iced like a tomb. The barn is beyond it, unlit, but its roofline is a saw against the sky. The lieutenant signals. Smoke grenades arc and hiss. White fog joins white snow, and the bowl becomes a room with walls. They rush the barn in pairs, rifles high, boots sure. A door bangs open. A burst rakes the fog. The point man drops and rolls behind a trough. The second man fires low and fast through the doorway. The team stacks, pushes, clears. Inside are spent belts, frozen footprints, and a stove that has gone cold. The enemy has pulled back to the orchard wall. Good. The wall is stone. Stone channels bullets. Stone also blocks sight. The base of fire lifts in disciplined steps. Tracers walk the road curve and then climb to the tree-line. The flanking team angles along a fence line where the snow is thin and the footing is firm. The reserve drags the culvert clear for the wounded and marks the route with torn cloth on hedge spikes. The platoon is now a single shape that bends but does not break. At the orchard the ground rises in a low saddle. Wind schemes across it and polishes the snow. Any man who crests the saddle will silhouette against the sky. The lieutenant refuses the crest. He pulls them left, finds a shallow reentrant, and threads them through in single file. The enemy fires over their heads at ghosts on the ridge. The platoon slips past at knee height in bitter breath. At last the road falls away behind them. A rail embankment cuts across their front. Trains will not run today, but the ballast gives cover and the ditch gives depth. They form a perimeter, count heads, and plot the next leg. The map says 2 kilometers to friendly lines. The ground replies with the same cold truth it has given all night. Choose the ditch, not the road. Choose the fold, not the crest. Let the terrain decide the battle, and make it decide for you. Snow covers the ridges east of Saint-Vith, a frozen silence hiding the chaos that tore through this valley in December 1944. The platoon huddles around a map spread on the hood of a half-track, its paper edges stiff with frost. The markings are from the previous day, already outdated. Enemy armor columns have shifted overnight. The First SS Panzer Division is pressing from the north, cutting the road that was their only route back. To the west, artillery flashes mark the American lines, but they are too far to hear the guns. Lieutenant Harris studies the contour lines. The forests look thick, but the frozen ground means the tracks will carry vehicles faster than expected. Intelligence said this sector was quiet, a backwater. Now it is the center of a tightening pocket. Around him, the men wait for orders that will decide whether they live until morning. The map offers few choices. Every road, every clearing is covered by German observation. The only chance lies in the ravines and frozen streams that twist through the hills, places too narrow for tanks. A distant rumble breaks the quiet. Engine noise, low and heavy. Someone curses softly. Harris folds the map, sliding it into his coat. They cannot stay. The order is simple: move west, avoid contact, link up with friendly lines near Commanster. It sounds easy on paper. On this ground, under the eyes of a veteran Panzer Division, it is almost suicide. The platoon moves in staggered columns, shadows between the trees. The snow crunches under their boots, each sound amplified in the still night. They follow the lines Harris traced earlier, the contours of safety imagined on a map. But the map is a lie. The terrain twists differently in darkness, and the ridges are steeper than any pencil could show. Somewhere ahead, a German patrol lantern flickers through the branches. The men freeze, rifles ready. For a full minute, no one breathes. Then the light fades. They keep moving. By midnight they reach a small creek bed. The lieutenant kneels, comparing the bend of the stream to what he remembers from the chart. It does not match. They are off course, drifting north toward the enemy's flank. He whispers to Sergeant Cole to correct the bearing. Cole nods and signals the men. They adjust, step by step, every movement a gamble between direction and detection. Mortar flares burst in the distance. Their pale light washes over the forest like a ghostly sunrise. The platoon drops flat, hearts pounding. The light reveals fresh tracks, tank treads and boots crossing the path just ahead. Harris realizes that the Germans have already passed through this area. The map cannot show that. It cannot show the fear, the exhaustion, or the bitter smell of burning oil carried by the wind. At dawn, they reach a ridge overlooking the valley. Smoke hangs in the air from burning vehicles, American and German alike. The lieutenant unfolds the map one last time. The colored lines and symbols mean nothing now. The landscape below has changed, roads cratered, bridges gone. Still, somewhere beyond that smoke, the friendly lines wait. He studies the terrain with his eyes instead of the map. A frozen marsh lies ahead, and behind it a line of trees that could conceal movement. He points toward it. The men nod silently. There is no more talk of strategy, no mention of objectives. Only the instinct to move, to survive. The platoon descends the slope, leaving the useless map behind in the snow. It flutters briefly in the wind before settling among the tracks of a dozen men who refuse to surrender to the geometry of war. Under a frozen sky, the platoon crouches in shallow foxholes cut into hard earth. Breath hangs like smoke. The tree line across the field spits tracers and the rattle of tracks grows nearer. A runner slides in on his knees with the battalion message. Hold this ridge until darkness. Conserve ammunition. Expect armored patrols. The words are simple. The meaning is clear. If the ring closes, nobody gets out. The squad leaders pass the orders down the line. Men check bolts and magazines with stiff fingers. One private stares at his hands as if they are not his. Another fumbles with a safety that refuses to move. The radio man twists a chewed antenna and tries to raise the company net. Static. A distant voice. Then silence. The cold presses through wool and skin and bone. The panic comes in small waves. A breath too fast. A hand that will not stop shaking. The platoon sergeant squats from hole to hole and steadies each man with plain tasks. Sight lines. Sectors. Signals. When you do the work, the fear has less room. Mortars find the ridge. Earth thumps. Splinters rain into faces. A gunner cries out and the assistant drags him deeper into cover. The platoon leader crawls up beside the forward hole and studies the ground with a map pressed to his knee. The valley to the west is a funnel. The road on the right is a kill zone. The drainage ditch that cuts the field is narrow, crooked, and mostly hidden by scrub. It is not safe. It is the only thread. He speaks without a single wasted word. We break contact after last light. Single file. 10 paces. Load one tracer every 4. If you are hit and can move, you move. If you cannot move, you wait for the last file. No shouting. No skylining. Compass bearing 280 to the ditch, then follow it north to the hedgerow. From there, crawl to the blind ridge and link up at the burned cart. Time 0 at 19:30. Set watches. Dusk bleeds out of the trees. The ring tightens. Machine guns rake the crest. The platoon answers only when fire pinches them to the ground. Short bursts. Then stillness. A flare lifts, paints the snow a dead color, and fades. The shadows return. The first file slips from the foxholes and vanishes into the field. Minutes elongate. The ditch stinks of ice and mud and old leaves. Boots suck at the bottom. Metal taps rock. Every sound is a threat. A patrol drifts across the field above them. Breath stops. The patrol passes. Movement resumes. A man loses his helmet in the water and keeps going. Another drops his last bandolier and bites back a groan. Resolve is a quiet thing. It is the choice to lift your knee one more time. At the hedgerow, a flare blooms again. The column freezes. A machine gun sweeps the ridge they left behind. The enemy fires into empty holes while the platoon inches along cold thorns, shoulders scraping bark. At the blind ridge a lantern shielded by a messed tin blinks twice. The files gather in a ragged knot. Head count. Too many gaps. The leader waits 1 minute. Then one more. At the edge of the 3rd minute 2 shapes crawl out of the dark and fall into the line. The platoon moves off the ridge and into the tree belt. The ring is still there, but it has a seam now. Orders cut the shape. Panic filled it. Resolve pushed through it. The night closes behind them. The ridge holds only cold air and quiet earth. The platoon is not safe. The platoon is alive. Wind cuts across the tree-line and carries every careless sound. The platoon huddles in a shallow fold of ground, faces darkened, breath steaming and instantly gone. Radios are dead by order. Metal is wrapped in cloth. Sling swivels are taped. Each man carries 2 bandoliers, a spare pair of socks, and the understanding that if the column scatters there will be no one to call. The lieutenant kneels over a map case shielded by a blanket. Compass set to a narrow azimuth. First leg to a hedgerow marked on the 1944 sheet. Second leg to a brook that runs north under the road to Saint-Vith. Final leg to a reverse slope outside the artillery fan of the First SS Panzer. Routes are memorized, not spoken. Rally points are assigned by touch and gesture. The password is simple, the countersign even simpler. A runner confirms the order of march. Point team. First squad. Platoon headquarters. Second squad with the bars. Third squad closing and carrying the wounded. They move when the cloud cover thickens and the snow groans under boots. No talking. Hand signals only. The point man counts paces, checks bearing, corrects 1 degree left to avoid a farmhouse where a dog once barked. A patrol passes on the road, boots crisp on ice, voices low and sure. The column melts into the ditch, faces pressed to frozen weeds. A flare rises, the pale light turning breath into smoke. No one moves. The flare hisses down, dies on the snow, and sound returns in tiny increments. They cross an open strip 1 squad at a time, rifles carried high to keep oil from freezing. A man slips, catches himself, swallows a curse. The lieutenant watches the horizon for the telltale pulse of an engine on idle. Somewhere to the south an MG-42 explores the dark in short, cruel bursts. The platoon leans into the ground, waits, rises, flows forward again. At the hedgerow the point holds a clenched fist. Everyone drops. The sergeant crawls ahead and finds wire at ankle height, a simple trip line anchored to a stick grenade. It is lifted with a stick, propped with a forked branch, marked with a strip of cloth. The column slides through that narrow gate one by one. The last man lowers the line without a sound. They make the brook at 0210 by watch. Ice clicks under weight but holds. The current is black and slow. Wounded men are passed across by 3 hands each. Every pack is checked, every canteen cap is pressed. On the far bank the lieutenant listens for the pattern of distant guns and plots his next leg by memory and the shape of the land. A truck grinds into gear on the road above. Headlights spear the trees and swing. Snow crystals flash. The platoon freezes as one body, breath locked. The beam moves on. Engines fade. Boots ease in snow. The night accepts them again. They climb to the reverse slope just before 3. The sky is a hard lid. Behind them the ring tightens on empty ground. Ahead lies a seam in the enemy line that may close at dawn. The lieutenant raises a hand, 5 fingers, then a fist. 10 minutes to warm hands, to check sights, to count men. Then the march continues, deeper into the dark that leads to survival. Snow muted the forest outside Saint-Vith, but the sound of engines carried like a blade. The platoon lay along a shallow ditch, 30 men, 2 light machine guns, 1 bazooka with 3 rounds, and ammunition counted twice. Behind them, a black road ran toward friendly lines. In front, the tree-line hid advance guards of the First Waffen SS Panzer Division. Holding here meant capture or destruction. Breaking out required deception and speed. The plan formed in minutes. The platoon leader drew it with a bayonet in the frost. 2 fire teams would cut left through the spruce and set a false front, spaced at intervals like a full company line. Each man carried extra bandoliers to seed the ground with cartridge cases. A 3rd team would creep right to a hedgerow and dig shallow fire pits. The machine gun teams would not open together, they would trade bursts in a ladder, imitating overlapping sections. The bazooka team would stay in the center as a floating spear, firing not at tanks first, but at a roadside cart and a culvert to throw sparks and smoke. The aim was simple. Make the enemy believe a larger force waited and make them hesitate. At the signal, a single flare rose from a farm track and painted the snow a dead white. The left skirmishers fired in crisp, short strings. The right side answered 2 beats later. Echo turned the uneven bursts into a chorus, and the forest sold the lie. The first German probes went to ground. A flare of their own arced up, then a mortar ripple fell short, chewing bark and snow. The platoon held fire, then the leader counted 10 and raked the culvert. Brick dust and steam blew across the road, like a hit on an invisible gun position. Radio reports later would say the enemy paused to bring up a half-track and a gun. That pause was the gap. The left teams fell back by bounds, dropping smoke grenades, leaving 2 men to shout orders and fire single shots as if correcting ranges. The right team slipped along a drainage ditch toward the road bend where the trees thinned. 1 machine gun sprinted, set on a fence post, and hammered a long burst into a tree line behind the Germans, as if enfilading from a second company. Confusion built its own weight. The enemy fired wide and slow. Tracers stitched air where the platoon had been. The bazooka team finally faced a tank shape nosing past the culvert and aimed not at the turret, but at the road edge. The blast lifted gravel and splinters, the driver braked, blocked by smoke and debris. Another pause. Another gap. The leader waved, and the platoon flowed onto the road in twos, low, fast, silent except for boots scraping ice. A final trick waited at the bend. A flare pistol launched from a ditch drew fire to an empty orchard, while the column cut behind a haystack and through a farmyard gate. A horse screamed. A lantern swung on a beam. A woman pulled children into a cellar. The squad at the rear left 2 crates of captured rations near the door as payment without words. Behind them, engines revved, then stalled, then revved again. Voices shouted in the wrong direction. The forest swallowed the platoon as it angled toward Bastogne. Only then did the leader breathe. They had 1 minute, not hours. But minutes make distance, and distance is life. By dawn, frost had crusted on cuffs and sleeves. The road bent south and the sound of their own artillery finally reached them, far and steady. The deception had held long enough. 30 men had made a battalion wonder. That was all they needed. The snow has crusted over into a hard shell. Boots break through with a dull snap, each step a small report that feels too loud. The platoon lines the edge of a frozen field, breath steaming, faces masked with soot. Behind them, the forest is full of spent casings and torn bandages. Ahead lies the open ground that the maps call a meadow and the men call a kill zone. Beyond it rises a low ridge that hides the road to friendly lines. The enemy has sighted this approach already. There are blackened patches where mortar bombs have walked across the field in deliberate lines. The hedges on the far side are sheared and splintered. The ditch that parallels the field is choked with ice and thin water. Somewhere behind that ridge, machine guns and a gun carriage wait for any movement that dares to show itself. The lieutenant kneels with the non-commissioned officer and the radio man. The handset is dead weight. Batteries fade in this cold and orders are old. The plan is simple because time has run out. 2 fire teams to rake the hedges and the far fence with every rifle they own. 1 hand-picked wedge to crawl the ditch, cut the wire, and reach the blind side of the ridge. When the machine gun swings to answer the noise, everyone else runs. It begins with a single rifle shot that hits the fence post and explodes in splinters. Then the field erupts. Tracers lash low over the snow. The first man into the ditch slides on his stomach, elbows paddling, muck and ice soaking through his sleeves. He does not lift his head because the air just above the ditch lip is filled with buzzing metal. He counts breath and distance. 5 meters. 10. 15. On the left, a Browning rattles a long burst and the barrel begins to smoke in the cold. A grenadier pops up and throws, then drops back as a mortar bomb cracks behind him. The blast tosses snow like flour. Screams carry, then are swallowed by more fire. The radio man clutches the set as if it were a life preserver and hunches lower. The crawlers find the wire where the ditch narrows. The cutters bite and chatter. A flare arcs up from the ridge and turns the world white. Every hedge and helmet becomes a silhouette. The machine gun shifts and digs into the firing line with a steady, methodical beat. Men fold. The lieutenant waves forward with his whole arm and the survivors rise and run. They run hunched and crooked, each step a gamble, each breath a burn. Bullets drum the snow around their boots. A man falls to his knees and another drags him by the webbing without breaking stride. The cutters rip the last strands and the wedge spills through the gap, crawling again, then scrambling up the far bank into the blind pocket of the ridge. Up close the ridge is all roots and frozen earth. They climb with gloved fingers, slide, claw again. Then they are on the reverse slope, a shallow bowl that deadens sound. The gun carriage is 30 meters away, crew intent on the field, backs turned. The wedge fans out, rifles level. 1 grenade arcs, then another. The explosions kick dust and smoke. The gun falls silent. The wedge pours fire into the shapes that try to crawl away. On the field, the sudden quiet is like a gasp. The lieutenant hears it and shouts the only order that matters. Go. The line surges. They cross at a stagger, hurling themselves into the gap, tripping, sliding, colliding. The ditch is behind them, the hedges are behind them, and the ridge swallows them whole. For a minute, there is only the sound of labored breathing and the hard knock of hearts in chests. They do not cheer. They count. They look down the far slope toward a road half buried in drifts, toward the woods that still hold friendly lines. The cost is in the snow behind them. The way forward is in front, darker trees and a thin ribbon of hope. The platoon forms up again, smaller now, and moves. Into the black winter of the Ardennes, the platoon holds a shallow line outside Saint-Vith. Snow drifts into the sights, turns breath into steam, turns metal stiff. The map says the road to Bastogne lies south, a thin vein through dark firs and broken farms. The radio carries only bursts of static. The First SS Panzer Division is reported on the move. The ring is closing. At first light, machine gun tracers rake the hedgerow. A half-track noses forward, then recoils under rifle grenades. The platoon leader studies the contour lines with a pencil tip. A saddle west. A creek bed east. Between them, a blind ridge that might screen movement if the men crawl low and accept the cold. He divides the squad, assigns intervals, fixes rally points by a ruined chapel and a split beach. They will move after dusk. They will not fire unless pinned. Dusk falls hard and fast. The column slides from one shadow to the next. Breath counts the pace. Boots find ruts by touch. A flare blooms behind them, then the slam of mortars. The men freeze, faces to the snow, as shards hiss through branches. When silence returns, they rise and push on, slower, flatter, more careful. A farmhouse door opens to a sliver of lamplight. A man steps out with a scarf over his mouth, eyes wide and hollow. He points not to the road but to a cattle path that cuts between thickets and a low stone wall. His hands shake. His family waits inside. If he is seen helping, there will be a reckoning when the front passes back. The platoon leader nods and traces the route in the snow with a gloved finger. The man nods back, once, and vanishes. The column bends toward the path. The stone wall shields them until the first field. Beyond it, a kill zone of churned white. The scouts go prone and inch forward, testing the crust. A tank lurks on the far tree line, engine idling, breath of exhaust rising like a ghost. The leader chooses deception. 2 men crawl left with a spool of wire and a single charge. They set it under a frozen culvert, then back away the way they came. On cue, the blast rips the quiet. The tank pivots toward the noise. The column moves the other way, across the open, one at a time, empty space between each body, rifles carried high to keep ice from the actions. They reach the creek bed and follow its black ribbon south. Artillery begins to range in, heavy and methodical. The platoon swallows the panic, checks bearings, and speeds up. A flare drops close. Snow becomes daylight. A machine gun opens. The rear man stumbles. 2 drag him into the reeds and bandage the thigh with a belt. No words, only breath. Near dawn, the tree line thins. A challenge call answers from the shadows ahead. Friendly syllables. A forward outpost of a battered infantry company waves them in. The platoon staggers past the wire. The count is taken. The wounded are lifted. The leader folds the damp map and finally exhales. They have broken the ring. They have not broken the cost. After the firefight ends, the platoon leader spreads a damp map on a crate. Men talk about tanks that were everywhere. The after-action report will later call them 2 armored cars and a self-propelled gun. Frost smokes from mouths. Someone insists they held for an hour. The watch he hands over says 16 minutes. The AAR is spare. Enemy pressure increased. Platoon executed fighting withdrawal. Losses moderate. It lists 3 names and stops. Memory stays on the 4th name, the one they never found. The AAR places the contact at the crossroads. Footprints in the frozen ditch trace a different route, a shallow S through hedges and a wire gate blown off its hinge. The sergeant recalls a calm, deliberate fire plan. The notes from battalion show a jammed radio, no mortarnet, and a friendly machine gun that never arrived. He remembers a white flare that led them out. The AAR records read. On the skyline, a chapel roof catches pre-dawn and turns black again. That is not in any file. We match compass bearings to the map. We pace the ground. The beaten zone is narrower than the veterans swear it was, but the angles confirm a blind ridge that made their world a corridor of snow and flame. The AAR gives us coordinates, the men give us texture. Together they build a truth that hurts. They did not win. They survived. That is the difference that kept the rest moving toward Bastogne. The ledger explains decisions. The voices explain fear. We fold the map, the ground keeps their story. The platoon moves at a crouch along a sunken lane of ice. Ahead, a church spire marks the last bend before friendly lines. The horizon pulses with flashes. Each flash means another shell. The men do not look up. They listen for the distant crack, then the rip of fragments. A runner points to a hedgerow gap. The lieutenant checks the map case, then the compass. The plan is simple. Cross 2 fields, bypass the ruined farmhouse, reach the stream bed, and use it as a covered route toward Bastogne. Simple on paper, brutal in practice. The first barrage lands short. Earth jumps. Helmets ring. A machine gun opens from the treeline. 2 rifles answer. The lieutenant signals smoke. Gray clouds billow, then drift wrong in the winter wind. They sprint by teams. One covers, one moves. A man goes down near the water. Another drags him by the straps. The medic checks a pulse and says one word that halts the squad. Then they move again. Artillery walks the fields in 50-meter steps. The stream turns to black slush. The platoon slides, crawls, and holds formation. A flare pops white overhead and turns the snow to daylight. Everyone freezes. The flare dies. They go. At the railway embankment a counterattack rolls past on the road above. The platoon holds in the culvert until the column passes. Then a voice challenges from the far ditch. Password and reply. Hands rise in relief and exhaustion. Bastogne is not safe, but it is reached. Dawn comes without celebration. The platoon reaches friendly lines in a staggered file, helmets scuffed, eyes hollow. Medics move in with practiced speed, counting the living first, then the lost. Names are checked against a soggy roster. 2 missing. 1 confirmed dead, tagged and covered. Weapons are cleared, bolts racked open. The sergeant orders a quick stand down, then an after-action review on the frozen verge. Maps unfold on a crate. The route they cut through the ring looks like a thin line. Every bend had a decision behind it. Move when the moon slid behind cloud. Crawl past the farmhouse with boards over the window. Hold fire until the half-track turned its turret away. They speak in short reports. Ammunition expenditure. Radio failures. The point man who saw the tripwire first. Each detail is logged, not to build legend, but to guide the next unit that tries this. Exhaustion tempts easy stories, yet the facts insist on edges. Civilians watched from cellars. A wounded tanker refused morphine to stay lucid on the gun. An officer corrected his bearing by touch, tracing frost on a compass bezel. None of it feels heroic. It feels necessary. As the light hardens, the cost becomes ledger clear. Boots without owners. A scarf caught on hawthorn where they crawled. Cartridge brass kicked into roadside ice. Supplies reissued, hands heavy. The platoon learns the simplest lesson of the Ardennes. Survival is not escape. Survival is work that continues after the running stops.